black locust, Robinia Pseudoacacia, pretty potent and complex tree, used extensively in food forest systems, agroforestry, silvopasture, and the like. A lot of mixed reviews on this being in the landscape. I'd like to spend some time talking about our first-hand experiences planting black locust in our food forest and how we've been managing them, some of the considerations that I would make sure folks are aware of before they commit these plants to their landscape too. The spoiler alert is overall we love them and that they're pretty complex and require a whole lot of management. So let me get into that. Right off the bat, I'd like to show what by some folks would be considered a really negative attribute. To me, it's compelling and exciting, but it's something to be aware of before you plant these trees. So in front of me, you can see pollarded steps of locust, pollarded plantings of locust. When I say pollarded, I mean trees that were planted, in this case, 8 years ago as seedlings that I bought in from a conservation tree group, I think down in Kentucky or Missouri. It's been a long time. And planted out about 200 of them. They grew with reckless abandon, very, very fast, beautifully growing. And 2 years ago, I cut them back when they were dormant, pollarding them, which means I stimulated new shoot production above the browsing height of the deer that are in this area. So whatever the animal is that might chew the stems and leaves, you would cut your pollard above that. And this new growth, this is 2-year-old growth on some of these, and you can see not only does it respond well to that, this is 2-year-old stem. This is almost firewood gauge at this point. But that act of stressing the tree can help stimulate a suckering response. So if you look into this area, now this is just to the north, it's a more light glade. All of these locust shoots, boom, 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 all through here. In fact, this whole intense thicket are more or less stimulated by the stress that those locusts went through when I did that initial cut. So when you plant locusts in your landscape, if you're digging near them, if you're cutting them hard, either as fodder for your animals or for chop and drop mulch, which we'll talk about in a moment, you can expect that that single locust or that glade of 50 locusts you planted or what have you will creep and sucker, for better or worse, into open glades around them. Let me talk about how I manage those and how I consider it an attribute. So in this area directly behind me, all of these shoots, which are for the most part well above my head within a year or two, the suckers of locust, they have all of the power and reserves of the main root system of the parent tree. So when they pop, they go very, very quickly. Benefit for some of you, if you know you wanted to ramp up your locust tree number extensively in the landscape and they were doing this suckering in an open field, when they're dormant, you can dig down with a sharp spade and dig these trees up and move them to new locations. It's a great way to propagate rapidly 8-foot, 10-foot trees that fix nitrogen. For me, I've got an apple here that I'd like to make sure it continues to get the light it needs. Hand tools, pretty straightforward. A scythe in the first year of suckers and shoots from locust takes care of those shoots no problem. So in the first year, I can cut those down. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but that's a whole lot of nice mulch I can use to put around the apple or to build my hugel mounds or just to mulch gardens in general. Once they get a little bit bigger, year 2, year 3, loppers do a fine job of chop and dropping as well. It's a lot of nitrogen-rich material. Now I just wish I had goats and sheep in this landscape. They would get the most benefit from this someday. But for now, in our food forest, sans animals, maybe the deer will come eat this. This makes a great mulch for hugel mounds and young plantings. The thicker the stem, the more I like to get really flush to ground when I cut it with these loppers or a handsaw. That makes it possible to maintain the reshoots that come up with the scythe rather than having woody stubble all throughout the landscape. The important takeaway with that is to remember that when you're planting locust, that it's not just where you've put that tree. If you're doing any sort of pruning or cutting, you can anticipate new shoots in new areas. And so long as you're anticipating that from the outset, you're going to be able to fold in the management time and energy to keep up with that and use it to your benefit. In here, where we've got these main locusts I was first showing, the pollarded locust in front of me, I went ahead and planted just to the north of them some American plums, which also have a really aggressive suckering habit. And so what I can do now is promote these plums. They're starting to get a little light-starved because this 2-year regrowth of locust to the south of it is blocking some light. But knowing that the locust is a chop and drop plant, it's a utility tree in certain aspects. I don't need necessarily pole and firewood from them right here. I'd be excited to have the plums and the black currants that I have underneath them. Black currant being so shade tolerant, I can just simply put the cuttings in and let them root underneath them, that I can chop and drop. And you can see here, I started doing that work with some hand pruners the other day and feeding these plums so that they can become the suckering force in this area. Here we have a thicket of locust. They're planted on about 6-foot spacing in all directions. Just like the other stand I showed, these were pollarded last year. Another layer to all this is when you do coppicing or pollarding on beings like locust, super vigorous, fast-growing trees and shrubs, the resprouts are often so numerous that part of your initial management when you coppice or pollard is to do some initial thinning on those shoots. So for example, in front of me, this seems like a pretty nicely trained and organized pollard. It's got 1, 2, 3 shoots. That didn't happen naturally. I went in last year when it made 30 young shoots and I pruned off all but the 3 that I wanted. And I actually even went up with the pruners and chopped a bit to shed some side branches so that it's a cleaner wood. And here I'd like to be able to harvest pole wood and firewood from this particular pollarded stand. But it's not just a hassle of management. Every single one of those new shoots that I cut off could be used as a mulch to feed the plantings that are underneath here. We've got bee balm and red currants, raspberries, even a chestnut or 2. And so every time I prune back those pollard responses, I can use them as a nice green tree alfalfa style mulch for what will ultimately be the next succession. Here's a pollard done last year with minimal to no initial pruning, and so now second year it's woody. The first year it's much easier to pinch off those new shoots, but this gives you an idea of what it will look like if it's unmanaged. Not bad if you're thinking about running animals through here and wanting to have ample browse available down low, but normally I would trim those up and make it a little bit tidier. One of the amazing benefits of having locust as an early succession pioneer and managing it is that these trees that were planted in 2011 or so, harvested 2 years ago, these poles have been sitting here. These are, I think they're harvested in year 6. I should count the rings, 6 or 7. But they're already stout enough that they can be used in fencing and trellising. That's in just a few years from coming out of a little opening here in our forest garden context, and already getting that utility. This could be firewood, even laying here and kind of forgotten about for 2 years. They haven't rotted because they are locust. That's one of the real benefits of them. And in fact, it's going to help make the bark slip off, so the draw knife work to clean these up before we use them in trellising for hardy kiwis and grapes and all that. It's going to be easier to clean them up because they laid here. So the other part of that is when you make those cuts, the pollards, the coppices, even the prunings mid-season, that correlates to a nitrogen plume in the soil. So you can use it and time your prunings to release nitrogen at the beginning of the seasons to boost the next plants that you have growing under them. I really love black locust in our landscape. We heat with its firewood in the winter. We use the rot-resistant, super strong pole wood extensively in our building projects. We love the flowers in the early spring that taste somewhere between cucumber and honey and a sweet pea. The bees love the flowers, the foliage is beautiful. They're just so useful in so many ways that I strongly recommend incorporating them into your cold climate landscape. But just remember, when you plant them, you've got a long-term management project ahead of you. They are not a set it and forget it kind of tree. So plan to observe and interact extensively with them, and they'll be incredible allies as you take degraded soils and newly opened glades and turn them into productive food forest paradises. Thanks for watching.